I am the world's greatest critic, and today is the second part of my special two-part review of World War II. And today we're focusing clearly on the Pacific Front. Now this war, it was mainly between the Japanese and the Americans. But you'll quickly learn watching this video that that was not all who was in this war. Now most people don't know how this war started. Well, the war ultimately started at the annual worldwide ping pong tournament on the island of Yoshi. See, in this tournament, it came down to two people. The Japanese champion, Fusajiro Yamauchi, and the American champion of Jesse Owens. These two battled fiercely throughout the last days of the tournament, but ultimately Jesse Owens came out the champion. The Americans celebrated their victory, taking their trophy back to America with them, leaving the Japanese in defeat. But the Japanese Emperor Genghis Khan was angry. He wanted that trophy. He thought he deserved that trophy. And he was angry at Yamauchi. So he ordered Yamauchi killed and decided to attack America and take back the ping pong trophy. Now to do this, he needed an army, and the samurai were not a large enough army to attack America. So he decided ultimately to make an alliance with the Groundhog Federation. Groundhog Federation, which was a force to be reckoned with back in those days, agreed to align themselves with the Japanese. Now the Groundhog Federation had been known for breaking alliances in the past and should not have been trusted by the Japanese Emperor, but he trusted them anyways. Well, the Japanese Emperor Genghis Khan and his generals and the leaders of the Groundhog Federation agreed on an attack on America, and this attack was to happen at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Now this attack was mainly to decimate the American fleet, making it easier for the Japanese to invade American soil and take back the trophy. And it worked. It decimated the American fleet. But the Japanese failed to take into consideration the resiliency of the American people, who quickly built massive ships to fight back the Japanese. But the Americans, knowing they need help in this war, aligned themselves with the Pigeon Alliance. Now, the Pigeon Alliance was a small yet formidable force who could easily take on the bravest of warriors. Now this alliance lasted the entire war. Now after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Americans, after rebuilding their fleet, set out to attack the Japanese. And they quickly took back the islands of Cuba and Puerto Rico in the Pacific, and they took back the groundhog lands of Trifecta and Sonata. The groundhogs quickly retreated, but the Japanese still had more fighting to go, and it all came to a head on the island of Iwo Jima. Here the Groundhog Federation and the Japanese were to face the American forces. The Groundhog Federation quickly retreated from this, leaving only the Japanese to defend the island of Iwo Jima. Well, we all know how this story goes. The American forces took the island of Iwo Jima, forcing the Japanese to retreat. This island was a great asset to the American people because here they could mount an offensive they had a base to mount the offensive on the Japanese mainland, on the Japanese island. The Groundhog Federation retreated to their homeland of Celestis, but the Pigeon Alliance bombarded them still, forcing ultimately the Groundhog Federation to sign a peace treaty with the American people. This peace treaty was negotiated by American General Douglas MacArthur, and it forced the Groundhog Federation to give up their land and scatter throughout the world. But the Americans still had one enemy on the horizon, and that was the Japanese. Now, with the Americans having Iwo Jima and forcing the Groundhog Federation out of the war, they were ready to invade the main Japanese island of Japan. But the Japanese had a surprise for the Americans. They built massive robotic warriors piloted by their best soldiers, and these warriors were called Gundams and could force back the American troops. But the Americans had a surprise for the Japanese. See, the Japanese top scientists who helped build these Gundams had defected to America and joined the American army and helped build the American Gundams to fight the Japanese Gundams. These American Gundams were led by American Admiral Halsey, leader of the Pacific Forces. Well, Halsey had a plan to invade the Japanese island. He planned to attack at 2 points, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It was going to be a two-pronged attack to attack the Japanese. Now this attack was risky because he'd be splitting his forces, risking that they could be easily overwhelmed, but they weren't. His attack worked perfectly, and soon they had the Japanese island and forced the Japanese back to the Japanese mainland in what is now China. Now the Japanese, they still had some tricks up their sleeve. They built a great wall all around their mainland to keep the American forces out. This plan worked to a T. The Great Wall kept the American Gundams out, but what the Japanese forgot about was the Pigeon Alliance. Now the Pigeon Alliance bombarded this wall, clearing holes in it, so the American Gundams could get in and fight the Japanese. The war finally came to a head at the Japanese capital of Nintendo.
I've never seen nothing in the world like this before. Now witnessing it, wishing it would go away. Ooh, why did it have to be? It could have been stopped, but now unstoppable. Nations around the world could have negotiated the failure of the League of Nations. Oh, and all he will do is keep on taking. Hitler is rising. But why did he have to hate the Jews? Aryan race supremacy. Concentration camps have started here, and the world didn't have a clue. We are into World War II, but the armies are set up. The stage is set for massive death, taking thousands of lives. The horror.
This battle lasted for 62 straight hours, but eventually the American Gundams came out on top, forcing the Japanese to sign a peace treaty. But the Japanese Emperor Genghis Khan did not agree with this peace treaty and committed suicide shortly before negotiating it, leaving his second in command, Kublai Khan, to negotiate the peace treaty. This peace treaty broke up the Japanese Empire, giving them only their island, the main island of Japan, and giving the Japanese mainland back to its native inhabitants, the Chinese, and naming it China. Now you may be wondering why the Japanese haven't tried it again, why they haven't tried to attack America again. Well, that's simple. The Americans, in order to keep the Japanese down, built bases all around Japan, forcing the Japanese not to have an army, not to have a navy, keeping them only on their little island. So because the Japanese couldn't invest in military, they invested in robotics and computers, video games, all the things we know Japan for today, because their economy had to grow somehow. Now the Groundhog Federation was defeated, the Pigeon Alliance and the Americans held strong and defeated them. Now, as a special treat, I have an exclusive interview with the last surviving groundhog soldier of World War II, Lieutenant Squiggles. Thank you for coming, Lieutenant Squiggles.
Thank you, World's Greatest Critic, for finally letting the Great Groundhog Federation side be told. Most people think of us as cowards for retreating and bowing out of the war early. Some don't even acknowledge that we were in the war at all.
Now, why do you think the Groundhog Federation has ultimately been kept out of the history books, Lieutenant?
I think it's because we weren't the main attack squadron. The Americans cared more about the Japanese than us, and we surrendered early.
Now, why do you think the Groundhog Federation surrendered so early during the war?
Well, the Groundhog Federation lost a lot of troops at Pearl Harbor, and really didn't expect a full invasion of Americans into our land. When the Americans invaded, invasion did occur, we didn't have the troops to hold them off, and fell pretty quickly.
Now, you guys at the Groundhog Federation built large caves and conclaves during this war in islands such as Iwo Jima and in your homeland. What ultimately led the American people, what ultimately led you guys to retreat out of these caves? What did the Americans do to force that retreat out of these caves?
You see, the American forces had mustard gas, and that mustard gas, while non-deadly to humans, was very deadly to us groundhogs. And they would launch the mustard gas into the caves, forcing us either to die in the caves or to retreat.
Ah, so that's what mustard gas was for.
I watched a lot of my friends die from that gas. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. Their eyes would literally blow up like balloons and explode. It created so much pressure in the little skulls.
Now, Lieutenant, do you ever think the Groundhog Federation will fully recover from this war?
No, in the peace treaty we gave away our land, and we were forced to scatter all over the world. So we could never become the once great empire we were.
Now, what do you think of the American holiday Groundhog Day, which is still a celebration of the peace treaty signed between the American people and the Groundhog Federation?
It was a hard war for all of us, and the Americans won hand down. And they have a reason to celebrate.
Now, Lieutenant Squiggles, is there anything you would like to add before we go?
Well, thank you, World's Greatest Critic, for letting me come on and tell the groundhog story.
Now, ultimately, I give World War II 2 bratwursts, a lemon, and a Heineken. Now, everybody, it's time for your favorite time, the top 10 list. Number 10, dumpsters filled with clothes. Number 9, the giant midget attacked again today, overturning 2 shopping carts. Number 8, like brown on whatever's brown. Number 7, the Chinese. Number 6, Bob Dylan's Symposium number 6. Number 5, the towels have taken over. Run for your lives. Number 4, every dog has to be spayed. Number 3, the box says move. Number 2, insert movie reference here. And number 1, go Cougars! Well, that's it for today. Join me next time when I complain about internet people.